The record will reflect the presence of counsel, the defendant, and the jury. Mr. Barker, you may proceed.
Adrian, we were talking just before the break about some of those videos. In the last video we saw, or a couple of the last videos, show what appears to be Mark Gooch walking to a parking lot with a bag, and then that bag's no longer with him. Do you recall that?
Yes, I recall.
At the time that you were retrieving these videos, when was it? When were you looking at these videos?
This was February timeframe.
All right. And the videos we were watching, they occurred in January?
Correct.
All right. So anything that would have been disposed of at that point would have been long gone. Is that fair?
That is a fair assumption, correct.
Was it February timeframe when you were doing all the investigation we talked about with the cell phone as well?
Yes.
All right. That's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Griffin?
Good morning, sir. Just a couple of questions for you. I want to go back and clarify a couple of areas. You indicated that one of the things that you looked at when you had extracted the information from Mr. Gooch's phone was a photograph. Did I hear you say that it was of an area on I-17, sir?
I believe it was I-17.
Having some familiarity with Arizona, that caught your eye, is that correct?
Correct.
It was a photograph of an area before you get to Cordes Junction, one of the exits on the way up there. Is that right?
Correct.
And that was familiar to you?
Yes.
Were there any other photographs that were familiar to you?
Not associated to Flagstaff, no.
You mentioned that one of the text messages that you thought was important was concerning a reference to text messages about a Mennonite who received a traffic ticket. Is that what you're talking about?
Yes, that is in reference to the ticket.
Are you saying that there were more text messages about Mennonites, or is it just that one?
I believe there's one more.
The other one about going and doing surveillance at a church?
Correct.
Thank you. Those are the only two, though, right?
Yes.
Now, one of the video clips that you showed from the surveillance cameras at the Air Force Base at the buildings showed Mr. Gooch leaving at about 8:30 in the morning on January 18th. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Are you aware of whether that footage ultimately, or whether there's evidence that ultimately depicts him leaving the Air Force Base shortly thereafter?
There might be some footage associated to that.
You're aware of the security system at the Air Force Base for entry and exit?
I am aware.
There are cameras stationed there, are there not?
Yep, in and out.
There's a requirement to check in with an ID and or sign in, correct?
Correct.
Thank you. Now, you indicated that when you see the person that's identified as Mr. Gooch leaving the building at approximately 8:33, maybe my eyes aren't as good as yours. I see a young, thin guy walk into the parking lot, but I can't recognize facial features or anything unique. How were you able to conclude that that was Mark Gooch?
So earlier that period, doing surveillance and watching his demeanor, how he walks, his stature, his build, that's how I'm making my assumption, is that I can identify that as Mark Gooch based on the way he walks, based on the stature, based on his height.
And did you know the area where his housing was located?
Correct.
Was his exit consistent with that?
Yep, everything was consistent.
Did you have a way of blowing up or going macro on that film to get a better look at the person?
If you did, you would see a very pixelated image.
Very grainy, couldn't really tell.
Correct.
Now, you indicated that when Mr. Gooch left at approximately 8:33, he was carrying something in his hand. Did you see that? Recall that? You mentioned it. I'm just curious as to whether you were able to determine what it was that he was carrying when he left at 8:33.
No, that statement was in reference to the video. I didn't see that at the time.
So your memory is that when he left at 8:33, he was carrying nothing,
He was carrying what appeared to be a black item.
but you weren't able to figure out what it was.
Negative.
That's a different thing than what he brought back with him when he returned.
I couldn't be able to tell you.
I assume that if Mr. Gooch was making repetitive trips back and forth from his room to his car before he left, you would have told us that.
Yep, I would have told you.
So the answer would be more specifically, that's the only trip Mr. Gooch makes between his residence and his car,
Correct.
8:33, correct?
Correct.
The ones that earlier that morning or before he left.
Correct.
You said that in the connection with the video showing Mr. Gooch's return on or about 6:55 in the morning of January 19, that he was carrying something at that point, correct?
Yes.
And you said that it appeared to be a plastic bag.
Correct.
And that's when he exits from his vehicle and goes to his room.
Yep, straight to his room.
Why do you say appears?
So, like I said, the angle is perpendicular to his room, but right in front of the stairwell, that's where his room number is. There is nothing further than that, which is why I know he was going to and from his dormitory room.
I understand that, but the object that he's carrying, did you say that that appeared to be a bag?
Yes.
Right. Were you able to drill down, if you will, closer on that and give us more certainty by reason of focusing on that aspect of the video?
So focusing on the aspect of the video, just the way it's shaped, like a teardrop shape, like when you take out a trash bag.
Did you compare that object or the shape of that object with the shape of the object that you saw at approximately 12:44 p.m.?
It's a very similar item, yes.
It's similar?
Yes.
Make that comparison?
Not directly, no.
Now, is it your representation to the jury that Mr. Gooch went nowhere else or did nothing else between the time he got back at approximately 6:55 and the time you next show him on video at approximately 12:42?
Can you repeat the question?
I'm asking you whether there's any activity that you monitored since you looked at all this footage. Did you monitor activity by Mr. Gooch between the time that he returned at 6:55 in the morning and the time that you showed us next at 12:42?
No.
So you didn't look for that?
If there was footage, we would have obtained it during our extraction of the system.
Are you aware of any investigatory information about whether Mr. Gooch went with another airman on Sunday morning to a swap meet?
I recall a text message referencing that swap meet, but I don't have video of that, no.
You don't have video of that because you didn't think it was important, you didn't see it, or it doesn't exist?
It's because I didn't see it.
Are you representing that video or that trip to the swap meet was not made?
No, that's not what I'm saying. Is if there's a video, then I personally didn't see it.
So if there was a trip to the swap meet that is later corroborated by other witnesses, Mr. Gooch had done other activity for hours before he went and got rid of his trash.
Correct.
No further. Thank you.
Mr. Barker?
Thank you. Just a couple follow-up, Adrian. You were asked about viewing these videos. I just want to make sure we're clear on the time frame. I believe you said earlier it was February. Could it have been much later in April that you were actually investigating Mark Gooch?
So the investigation was a couple of months long, various months long. So we might have obtained certain videos on or around April.
All right. Do you have notes to that effect somewhere? Or a report?
Yes, I can reference a report. I would have to step outside though.
That's okay. Well, we're just asking your best memory today. If Coconino County came into the picture in April with OSI, would that make sense in your memory?
Yes, that would make sense.
All right. You were asked a question about the entry-exit gates on the base, right?
Yep, correct.
People don't sign out when they leave. It's more of an entry operation, right? You hand an ID at the entry point.
Correct. So when exiting, there is no procedure such as signing or scanning out. It's upon entry that you have to make interaction with local sentry from security forces.
All right. Thank you. That's all I have.
Any of the jurors have a question for this witness? Thank you, Mike. Counsel, since there's a number of them, I think it might be easier just to go back and do a sidebar. Dahlia, we'll call you if we need you. Thank you. Okay, we'll wait for one more. Actually, you know what? We'll wait for however many you have, just to be clear. Since it sounds like we've another. Well, you know what we'll do? We'll go start working with the attorneys and I'll start reviewing. And then any additional questions Mike can bring back to us. Okay. I'm going to ask these questions exactly how they're written. What day specifically did Mr. Gooch access the Facebook missing persons page?
Specific date? Your Honor, I would have to refer to my notes to give an exact date on that one because it was multiple dates.
So, counsel, how do you want to address this? Do you want to just address it with follow-up questions, or?
I'd be fine with that, Judge.
Mr. Griffin, are you fine with that as well? Okay. What time frame did the history of Mr. Gooch's cell phone covered?
2016 until the day that the cell phone was seized.
The victim's body was found on February 21. In 7 days, you were called on this case? That's the question.
In 7 days, I was not called on this date.
Mr. Morales, okay, again, I'm reading them exactly as they're written. Mr. Morales, do first-year airmen use the word surveillance? Let me back up. Mr. Morales, do first-year airmen use the word, quote, surveillance, quote, in their key words in the Air Force daily military life,
No, they do not,
specifically as an Air Force mechanic?
especially not as an Air Force mechanic.
Do Air Force personnel permitted to have personal firearms in their dorm rooms?
Not in their dorm rooms.
Are the firearms ever checked by gate, I think it says sentry officers, and then it also says security guard.
Yes, so there is random vehicle searches. So it is possible for an airman to come onto a military installation with a weapon. But security forces does conduct vehicle searches at the gate randomly.
Was it Sasha's personal Facebook page or county that Mark was visiting?
No, it was not.
Does base have assigned parking spaces?
No, we do not.
You mentioned you saw law enforcement techniques, searches being on Mark's phone. Can you go into detail of what you saw and discovered?
So as stated earlier, keywords such as surveillance definitely would trigger my mind, trigger my curiosity. Other techniques such as, I need you to wipe my cell phone, I need you to dispose of this, I need things like that is what I was referring to. That an airman, specifically someone in the aircraft field, should not be using. If there were security forces, I can see that, but this was not the case.
Do the junior airmen have designated parking spots in their parking lot? We already asked that, but you're being asked it twice.
So I guess I couldn't go into detail, Your Honor. Junior airmen do not have assigned parking spaces in their dormitory parking lot. However, some work centers may or may not have assigned duties such as team chief or leadership roles. That's when you'll see the assigned parking spots. But traditionally, for a dormitory parking spot, it's whichever parking spot is open.
Are dorm occupants required to take out their own garbage?
Yes, is one of their duties as residing in government housing. You are expected to clean and maintain a neat dormitory because we conduct random room inspections as well.
Can recruits keep firearms in their personal vehicle on base?
Negative.
Was a rifle carried by the accused at any time and loaded into his vehicle? If yes, prior date or later date, both, question mark. So there's,
If there was a rifle loaded or unloaded to his vehicle on base, I do not have knowledge of that.
are there any videos showing the defendant entering or exiting the facility at the appropriate times on the 18th and 19th? Oh, I'm sorry. There's a addition to the question. Let me back up, or modification to it. Not by me, by the person that wrote it. Are there any videos showing the defendant entering or exiting the facility, Luke Air Force Base, at the appropriate times on the 18th and 19th?
I believe there is footage of the entry and exit locations surrounding Luke Air Force Base.
Any other questions from the jury before I turn the witness over to counsel for follow-up? Okay, looks like we might have another question. Counsel, will you approach, please? Mr. Barker? Please describe, if you can, when you were keeping tabs, so to speak, on the defendant. Were you monitoring his movements through surveillance cameras or in person or by other means?
It was in person.
How much time so I think that means approximately, were you assigned to keep tabs on the defendant?
It was a couple of hours, every day leading up to his apprehension for a total of, I would say, approximately 10 days.
Did the defendant continue his job duties assigned on base as usual during your time keeping tabs on him?
Yes, the individual carried out day-to-day activities.
Any other questions from the jury for this witness before this witness is turned over to counsel for follow-up? All right, apparently not. Don't see any indication of that. Mr. Barker?
Thank you. Adrian, regarding the question about video at a gate security, I think that was a question. You don't have video of that, do you?
Not on my person, no.
All right. Did you review any video of that? I guess it's a better question.
I did not know.
There is a system, though, for entering the base where you have to present an ID. Is that right?
You are correct.
Right. And that's to a live person. A person has to verify that the person handing the ID is the person, right?
Correct. So it's a two-part system. Your ID gets scanned with a handheld scanner. That ID is then presented to security forces, and they conduct a visual. So not only do they verify it's you with your CAC card, which is your Wide Common Access card, but they also verify it's you on the picture.
All right. You were asked a question about any video of the defendant loading or unloading a gun in a car, and you didn't see any video of that. Is that right?
I personally did not review a video of a weapon being unloaded or unloaded, no.
Which days were you focusing on when you were looking at this video?
If we're referring to the dormitory footage, we focused on the time of the incident and the time that the deceased was located.
All right, so January 18th was when Sasha Krause was reported disappeared.
Mm-hmm.
Is that one of the days that you focused on?
Correct.
All right. And then the following day, as we saw from the video as well.
Correct.
And then there was the discovery of her body was on February 21st, 2020. Is that another time frame you looked at the video?
Yes.
All right. Aside from that, did you look at all video in between those dates and dates prior to January 18th?
There was footage associated to all of those dates. I, however, did not conduct a review of those footage.
All right. If a gun had been loaded or unloaded out of a car outside of the base, you wouldn't have video of that. Is that right?
Outside the base, negative.
You mentioned in response to a question about language, and I'm paraphrasing, wiping a cell phone.
Mm-hmm.
Is that something you observed on the defendant's cell phone?
I did.
Do you recall the context of that information?
So the context wasn't for this incident. I believe that conversation took place regarding a separate incident. The context behind that was us.
Hold on, there's an objection. Sustained.
You asked a question about the website that you observed, or websites you observed, one being a Facebook account. And I believe the response was it wasn't Sasha Krause's Facebook account, correct?
Correct. That was not her personal Facebook account.
Are you aware of Mennonite culture and their belief about technology, using technology?
I am somewhat aware, yes.
Would it be unusual for a Mennonite to have a Facebook page?
Yes.
The Facebook page you were referencing, was that just for law enforcement? So San Juan County Sheriff's Office, for instance?
Yes, that was, I believe, San Juan's own personal Facebook page where they post safety bulletins, missing person, rewards, things of that nature.
Right. You mentioned that searches, random searches do occur on the base. Do you know how often those occur?
I wish I could answer that. They are random. I cannot give a specific.
Is there a place where people can store weapons on base?
The proper procedure is to contact security forces. We do have a base-wide armory where if you would like to own a weapon, you can have it registered and housed at the security forces armory. And if you do elect to retrieve your weapon, it is your duty and privilege to go to and from base, not to come on base and linger. So you have to pick up your weapon, depart base, conduct your activities, come back on base, and go straight to the armory. You should not be taken into your dormitory or shopping with the weapon in your vehicle.
Are you aware if Mark Gooch ever registered a weapon with the armory on base?
I do not have knowledge of that, no.
There may be some confusion on some dates. You were asked a question about if your investigation began in February. We just referenced that Sasha Krause's body was found or discovered on February 21st, 2020. Does that make sense to you?
Yes, after thinking about it, February was important in my mind because it was time-stamped of when the deceased was found. The investigation did not begin until on or around April 2020, on our end, OSI's end.
All right, and that was after Coconino County reached out to you and asked for assistance, is that right?
Correct. They coordinated with our leadership and thus leading to the joint investigation.
All right, thank you. You were asked a question about which day or days did Mark Gooch access the missing person Facebook page. Do you have notes that reference that?
There's pictures that reference that.
You have them with you?
Not on my person, although I do have personnel back at Luke Air Force Base on standby for this particular reason.
Okay. Perhaps we can look into that later, but that's all I have for now, and maybe I can look into that. Thank you.
Mr. Griffin. Oh, yes, Mr. Griffin, sorry.
Sir, just a few more questions.
Absolutely.
Follow-up. I want to ask you about your answer about the use of the word surveillance. You said that Mr. Gooch, as an airman, that's not a common phrase or word that would be used. Is that what you said?
Yes, that is what I said.
You used, if I understand this, you used sort of a keyword search when you were looking through the data dumped from his phone, correct?
Correct.
And would you tell the jury that the word surveillance appeared at any time other than one time?
I believe the word surveillance was identified once, and then there was a typo that leads me to believe it's the word surveillance, but I believe it was mispronounced.
So again, the only thing that you can tell us is, as we have information about this surveillance term, was the term that was used when he was looking at a church. Is that right?
That is correct.
Thank you. We're clear that no guns on base without okay, correct? And without storing them in the armory.
Correct.
And random car searches, random room searches, random urine tests are all part of the business there at the base.
Yes, so that is part of our base-wide procedures to keep our airmen and our residents safe.
You tell us when Mr. Gooch was subjected to any random car or dormitory search.
I personally would not be able to attest to that.
You know whether he was the subject of any such random search of his car or his residence during the period of, say, January 15th through February 21?
I would not have knowledge of that.
You were asked a question about whether there was ever any footage reviewed by you, sir, that showed Mr. Gooch carrying a gun to or from his dormitory room toward his car during the relevant time period. Do you recall that question?
I do recall that question.
Your answer was no, you don't recall any footage. My question to you, sir, was you certainly looked for that, did you not?
Absolutely.
And I also just want to be clear, I asked you previously during examination, but just so we're clear, you looked at, personally, you looked at footage, surveillance footage on base from essentially January 18, at least through the 21st of February?
Yes.
So you rolled all that film to see if you could see Mr. Gooch doing anything else during that period of time?
Correct.
I asked you about whether you had any memory of him going to, leaving the base on the 19th in the morning to a swap meet. You said you didn't have any memory of that. Is that correct?
I don't have any memory of that. The video footage that was reviewed, I was not the only agent assigned to review the footage. So if there is a narrative associated to that step, it might have been done from a local colleague. But I myself did not see him leaving with another airman, to your point.
You aware of any video footage showing Mr. Gooch to have left the base, say, 2 or 3 days after the 18th or 19th?
Did I see him leave base? I did not.
You looked for that, is that correct?
Yes, someone looked for it, but it was not me.
But based upon that review, no footage of Mr. Gooch leaving the base in the 2 or 3 days after the 19th?
Correct.
No further.
I just kind of follow up on that last point, which was a little different than your question.
You may.
Thank you. Adrian, would it surprise you to find video of the defendant leaving that dorm on or about the evening of the 21st of January 2020?
Objected as to facts, not in evidence. Rejected the following question.
I can rephrase it.
All right, so the objections are sustained. Go ahead.
Do you know for certain if there's a video of the defendant leaving his dorm on January 21st, 2020?
It's been asked and answered.
Overruled.
You can answer.
Okay. Before I give you a definite answer, I do have copies of those extractions. I would like to conduct one last glance to thoroughly answer this question.
All right. Well, we're asking you right now while you're on the stand, and
Okay.
perhaps we can recall you for that purpose. Sitting here now, do you have a memory of that?
The 21st, as I sit here, no.
Okay. You'd have to review that video again to answer that question.
Correct.
All right. Thank you. That's all I have.
If I can follow up.
Yes, you may.
You've answered the question before, correct?
If I have knowledge of the 21st of February?
I mean, we could go back and you could go back and check on every answer you've given us today, correct?
I could, yes.
But as you stand here today, you've given the answers to the best of your ability, correct?
As I stand here, correct.
All right, may the witness be excused?
Subject to recall. Thank you.
You are excused subject to recall. So so that means you cannot talk to anyone about the case other than the attorneys. And because you could be recalled. Okay, so you can't talk to anyone about the case or let anyone talk to you about it until Mr. Barker lets you know you've been discharged as a witness, so to speak. Okay, and that's again because you're subject to recall.
Understood, Your Honor.
Right, you can step down. You're excused today.
Thank you.
Yeah, subject to recall. Thank you. Mr. Barker, you may call. Mr. Barker, you may call your next witness. Ah, okay.
Judge,
May.
will be a freeze time.
Certainly. And if you're having any issues, let us know. I did hear Jared's voice, so I think Jared's back in the courthouse. Jared's our IT person. If you want to stand up and stretch, you can.
Do you solemnly swear, under penalty of perjury, the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
My name is Karen Lowe. Lowe is spelled L-O-W-E. I'm a forensic examiner, trace evidence unit at the FBI laboratory.
How long have you been working there?
Almost 26 years.
All right. And you said you work in the trace unit?
That's right.
What does trace mean in a forensic sense?
Generally speaking, it means anything small and easily transferred through contact. So for my case, it involves hairs and fibers.
All right. And what type of education and experience do you have to qualify you as a forensic scientist in that area?
My education is a Bachelor of Science in Biology from the University of Scranton, a Master of Science in Criminal Justice from Northeastern University.
All right. Do you have any training that is ongoing with the FBI to be a forensic scientist in trace?
Before I was qualified, I completed a year-long training program where I worked under the supervision of other qualified examiners. I took tests, oral boards, moot courts, and competency tests.
All right. And do you work in a laboratory at the FBI?
Yes.
Okay. Tell us the process of identifying trace evidence. What are you doing when you try to do that?
To do that, we need to collect the evidence. So if we receive something like a shirt, this will be taken into a processing room and processed using a gentle scraping motion to remove any debris adhering. The hairs and fibers are then mounted onto glass microscope slides, and I'll examine the slides to identify hairs and fibers present. And if I have known samples, I can compare the hairs from the evidence to those known samples.
All right. Thank you. And is it common then for you just to receive items of evidence packaged and with a request to do that type of analysis?
Yes.
All right. In this case, were you given any items to analyze for trace evidence?
I was.
All right. Can you describe what those items were?
I received clothing items and debris that were identified as coming from Sasha Krause, and head hair sample from Sasha Krause, and a head hair and arm hair sample, and pubic hair sample identified as coming from Mark Gooch.
All right. And what type of analysis were you asked to provide?
Because all the items were identified as coming from Sasha Krause, it was just a hair exam.
Okay. So you were trying to find any hairs on these items, is that right?
Right, so I was looking to identify hairs present, determine if they were suitable for comparison, and then compare to known samples.
What makes a hair suitable for comparison?
If I can determine that a hair is either a head hair or a pubic hair, that would make it suitable for comparison, because research has shown that there's sufficient variation in those hairs to make an association meaningful.
All right, so an association, but is it a little bit less than like a fingerprint then?
Yes, hairs are not unique to an individual, so I can't identify hair to a specific person. And the pool of individuals who could be included is unknown.
All right. And so is there something else besides hair and pubic hair that you may mistake for a hair? Say animal fur or anything like that?
I can determine the difference between animal hair.
All right. And so when you find a hair on an item, what are you trying to compare it to?
Once I determine that it's either a head hair or a pubic hair, then I would compare it to any either head hairs or pubic hair samples that were collected from an individual, whatever I may have in the case.
All right. And is the idea to either make that association or to exclude that comparison? Tell us about that process.
Okay, so to do a comparison, I use a comparison microscope. And this is two high magnification microscopes that are connected by an optical bridge. And this allows me to look at two samples in the same field of view. So I'll compare all of the characteristics present in the three main areas of the hair, which is the cuticle, the cortex, and the medulla. And I'm looking to see if all of the characteristics present are present in the same amount, arrangement, and distribution between the question hair and the known hair sample. If I see differences, then that would be an exclusion. So the source of the known sample cannot be included as a possible source of that hair. If the microscopic characteristics are the same, then I can conclude that the source of the known sample can be included as a possible source of that hair. But again, it's not unique to an individual, and I don't know the number of sources that could also be included.
All right. Well, let's say you find a comparison. Again, we're not talking about this case, but let's say you find a comparison or make a comparison. Is there some type of statistic you can provide, or how much of a conclusion can you make when you see similarity?
We cannot use statistics. If we do have an association, that hair or those hairs would be sent for DNA analysis as well.
All right. Let's talk about the DNA on hair. What type of DNA analysis can be done on hair?
If there is tissue present, then nuclear DNA, which is what the typical DNA can be done. If there's no tissue present, then mitochondrial DNA could be done.
And how is that different from nuclear DNA?
Mitochondrial DNA is inherited maternally, so all of your maternal relatives would have the same DNA. So it's similar to hair conclusion, where someone can either be included or excluded.
All right. But not as precise as the other type of DNA testing, right?
Right.
In this case, did you find any hairs that were that you could use for comparison? Talk about that.
And I examined all of the items that were identified as coming from Sasha Krause for any hairs that were suitable, and there were multiple items with hairs that were suitable.
All right. And what did you do once you found those hairs that were suitable?
First, I compared it to the known hair sample identified as coming from Sasha Krause to see if there were any hairs that were foreign or different from the known sample.
And what did you conclude?
One hair that had characteristics of European ancestry that was found on my item 7, which was the right shoe identified as coming from Sasha Krause, was microscopically dissimilar to the known sample identified as coming from Sasha Krause.
All right. You said from her shoe. Is that what you said?
That's correct.
Okay. So there was one hair that was different from Sasha Krause's hair,
That's right.
and that one hair came from her shoe. Is that right?
That was it, yes.
Okay. I just want to make sure we're clear on that. And did you compare it against Mark Gooch's hair samples? And what was your conclusion on that?
This hair was also microscopically dissimilar to the hair sample identified as coming from Mark Gooch. So accordingly, based on that known sample, Mark Gooch cannot be included as possible source for that hair.
All right. Now, you've been doing this for a while, it sounds like, right? Okay. How often are you able to make comparisons, not matches, but these types of comparisons?
Any exclusions?
Objection as to foundation and relevance.
Sustained.
Is it difficult to make comparisons on hair?
Is it difficult now?
All right. What are limitations, or what are things that might prevent a comparison?
If the hair is
Again,
not
I'm going
suitable
to
for
object.
Hold on, I'm sorry.
Relevance.
It's the judge and there's an objection. I'm sorry.
Object as to relevance. She says she found one hair. She made a comparison. Questions about
Counsel, no speaking objections.
objection.
All right, now, I just need you to repeat your question because the objection was coming at the same time you were asking the question, so I'm not sure if I've got the question completely.
And I don't remember the exact wording of it now.
We
But my-
can read it back, or we can just, I could not make a ruling on the objection.
Sure.
You can just maybe ask the question again. If there's an objection, then I'll deal with
I
it.
think it was something along the lines of what could prevent a comparison? What are the, in other words, what are the limitations here? Not specific to this case, but in the science of hair comparison.
Objection is relevance.
Overruled.
Go ahead and answer, Karen.
What would be a limitation would be if the hair is not suitable for comparison. So like a body hair or a hair fragment, or if I don't have the samples.
All right. I guess one of the obvious things is if no hair is left on an item, right? That would prevent a comparison. So in this case, the one hair you could not match to Mark Gooch. It also was dissimilar from Sasha Krause. Did you do anything further on this case? All right. And when did you perform this analysis? I don't know if I asked you that.
We received the items in 2020. My report is dated February 23rd, 2021.
One other question I forgot to ask is there anything about the length of time that a hair is on an item that would prevent comparison or it would degrade the hair in any way?
Hair doesn't necessarily degrade over time, but if there's a length of time between when a hair was potentially deposited and that item is collected as evidence, could result in loss.
Loss in what way?
Transfer to another item, or if the item is subjected to elements or things like that, trace could be lost.
When you say subjected to elements, what is that referring to?
If an item evidence is outside and exposed to the elements, it could result in loss as well.
All right. You have a moment, Judge? All right. Those are all the questions I have, Karen. I'm going to hand this over to defense counsel who'll have some questions, okay?
Mr. Mr. Griffin?
I guess it's afternoon where you are, Ms. Lowe. Good afternoon.
It is.
All
Good
right,
afternoon.
my name is Bruce Griffin. I'm counsel for Mr. Gooch. I saw you the other day. Sorry you had to return before you could testify live for us. Thank you. So I do have a couple of follow-up questions for you. I just want to make sure that we understand the items that you received and you examined. They're listed in your laboratory report. Could you just walk through the items that you received and examined?
Sure. I received a jacket that was identified as coming from Sasha Krause, a dress, a bra, 2 socks, 2 shoes. Do you want me to go through the debris items individually as well?
Please.
Okay. Debris from possible bullet defect area. Debris from right back area of scalp, Sasha Krause. Debris from left shoulder of jacket, Sasha Krause. Debris from right shoulder of jacket, from Sasha Krause. Debris from, excuse me, debris from chest of dress, from Sasha Krause. Debris from left ring finger, Sasha Krause. And debris from right hand, Sasha Krause.
You focused on the one hair that came off of the right shoe, item number 7, and you told us you analyzed that, correct?
I analyzed all the hairs,
Right.
but the hair from item 7 was the only one that was similar
And
to Sasha's.
did you find any other hairs that you analyzed?
Yes.
All right, and tell us the outcome of that examination.
The remainder of the hairs that were suitable for comparison were microscopically similar to the head hair sample from Sasha Krause.
Okay, so that covers the universe of the hairs, correct?
That's correct.
All right, thank you. Now, let's spin real quickly to the debris. Did you do any analytical work on any items that you've classified as debris?
Yes.
All right, and tell the jury what you did in that regard.
I compared any hairs that were suitable to the head hair sample identified as from Sasha Krause. For those items as well, any hairs that were suitable were microscopically consistent with the head hair sample from Sasha Krause.
All right. Now, can we talk further off the subject of hair and over to the subject of fiber? Did you analyze any, well, let me back up. Did you find or identify any fibers from the debris that you thought were worthy of further examination?
Because all the items in this that I received in the case were from, identified as coming from Sasha, and I didn't receive any other fiber samples in the case, I didn't do any fiber examination. They've been preserved for possible comparisons.
I'm going to turn the video back over to counsel. I have no questions.
Thank you, Karen. Just a couple follow-up questions. How many hair samples in total did you identify,
May I refer to my notes?
please?
Six of the items had hairs that were suitable for comparison.
Does that mean there are 6 individual hairs?
More than that, multiple items had multiple hairs, but at least 6 items had hairs that were suitable for comparison.
Do we know, can you give us a figure of how many hairs in total then? Or do your notes indicate that?
They don't.
All right, so multiple hairs on multiple items, can we say that?
Yes,
All right, and it was just the one hair that was dissimilar from Sasha, is that right?
that's correct.
You were asked a question about fiber testing. Is that something you also do at your lab? And would it be a similar process for comparison? You would be looking under a microscope?
Yes,
Now, in this case, since you were given items from Sasha, you would expect those fibers to be fibers from Sasha. Is that fair?
potentially. actually, but what I'm looking for in trace exams is evidence of transfer or contact, because I didn't have anything from any other location or person. There wasn't really anything I could do.
Right. In other words, you could find fiber from her jacket on her dress, and that would be, you would expect that, right?
Correct.
All right. May I have a moment, Judge? All right, Karen, those are all the questions that I have. There may be some jury questions, so if you could just hold on.
Do any of the jurors have a question? Okay, apparently they do.
Yeah, I'm going to put this face up, but we're still here, okay?
Okay.
Counsel, will you approach? Just for the record, the jurors have asked the same question. So I'm going to just ask it once in one of the questions.
Want me to,
How do we want to do this?
I'll face you.
Okay.
The judge does have a question from the jury.
Okay. Can you hear me okay? It's Judge Nichols. Okay. All right. So here's the question. Did you do, excuse me, the analysis on the one hair found in Mark Gooch's car? If so, did it match Sasha's hair?
I didn't receive any evidence that was identified as coming from Mark Gooch's car.
All right. Any other questions from the jury for this witness? All right. Apparently not. Mr. Barker. Do you have any follow-up to this juror question? Okay. Okay. Mr. Griffin. Okay.
This thing back and forth. You hear me now?
Yes.
All right, thank you. Is it unusual that you would receive an interagency request to process a hair, in other words, a hair located by another agency?
It is not.
Right. And
unusual.
in fact, the hairs that were collected and sent to you, the debris, all the items that you've identified, the FBI didn't collect those. They were sent to you by another agency, correct?
Judge, I'm going to object as to outside the scope.
Overruled.
Can I have some follow-up then, Judge?
Yes, you
Thank
can. You can. Go ahead, Mr. Oh, yeah, I'm not sure if you need to repeat the question or not, but.
Do you have the question, ma'am?
Did you hear the question, or do you want it repeated?
I think I'm okay.
Okay.
I don't know. It came in through the FBI office, but I don't know that they collected it.
All right. If we had information that the material was collected by the Coconino County Sheriff's Office, do you have any information that would be different from that?
I don't.
All right. And my question to you again, just to be clear, is that if other evidence in the form of fibers had been collected by another agency working in the investigation of this case, they could have also sent that to you, just like the material that you did examine, correct?
That's correct.
All right. Now I have no further. Thank you. Back to counsel.
Mr. Barker.
Aaron, do you have any information about what facilities Coconino County has in regards to fiber or hair analysis? All right. The FBI, it would be common for the FBI to get this request because the FBI has that capability. Is that right?
That's right.
How often is it that, well, can you give us a percentage of how many requests are coming from the FBI as opposed to an outside agency?
Well, I can get cases that are submitted through local agencies, that are submitted from the FBI, and that are submitted from the FBI by way of another local agency.
Sure.
So it's a combination.
And can you give us a percentage of how many are submitted directly from another agency?
My case is probably close to half.
Thank you. That's all I have.
May this witness be excused? All right, you are excused. Thank you. You're welcome. Mr. Barker, I'm just thinking it's 11:54, and Mr. Griffin, that we might just go ahead and take our lunch break before we call another witness, since it's 6 minutes to the noon hour. Okay, all right. So, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, remember the admonition. Please do not talk to anyone about the case. Please do not let anyone talk to you about the case. Keep an open mind about the case, and please do not formulate any opinions about the case. Please be back in the jury room no later than 1:20 so that we can call for you as close to 1:30 as possible. Enjoy the lunch hour. Thank you. We stand in recess. Please be seated. All right, the jury's been excused for the lunch and recess. Counsel, anything you wish to put on the record?
Oh, thank you.
All right, so if you could be here about by 1:20-ish as well, or 1:15, 1:20-ish, so if something comes up and you want to put it on the record, we'll have time to do that. Enjoy the lunch hour. We stand in recess.